The tower where the student council conducted its affairs was one of the first things that could be seen as someone approached the city. No one knew when or how the tower was created, but the tower had survived through various cataclysmic events. There were not as many structures in this world as old as the tower. As Valsandra traveled through the outer city, where many of the civilians and merchants lived, she was constantly acknowledging those who called out to her. With her background as a commoner, many saw her as an inspiration and admired how she was able to attain her position. The other positions on the councils were held by those that were part of the nobility. Even though the city claimed not to have a division between those who came from the nobility and those who didn't, many nobles still made a big deal about their lineage. Compared to other countries, inside Illumin, many nobles would spend time in prison cells for committing offenses. In other nations, the nobility may get away with criminal and civil acts. But inside of this city, the Peacekeeper Company did a remarkable job at punishing those who broke the law. There was a slight difference when someone entered the city ring, where the academy was located. Since a lot of the city's revenue came from students, the student council would sometimes be more lenient if the offender was a noble. This caused her no end of frustration, considering how her job was to make sure that this wasn't the case. The problem was that she was the only commoner on the council, so her voice was often drowned out by the other members. Though she may not be able to lock up a noble, there were other methods she could rely on. This came in the forms of fines and restrictions, where she would not allow the nobles to have access to the servants for however many days. Reaching the inner circle of the city, the part where the academic portion was located, there was a large gate where only students were allowed to pass through. A squad that was part of the academic company and the disciplinary committee were checking the various identification cards of the students. Even though there was plenty of things to do inside the academy, students would go out into the outer ring to enjoy various activities. One of the members of the disciplinary committee noticed her approaching and yelled out, "All attention! The Lady Knight!" Both squads stopped what they were doing and formed rows to present themselves. The gate was open and she was able to pass through. There were two gates, the main entrance and the side gate, which was for the students. The main entrance was used for those in higher positions and supplies coming into the academy. As she passed by the students, many of the girls called out her name to try and get her attention. For some reason, Valsandria had a fan club composed of only women that would call out to her. Shops inside and outside the academy would sell posters showing off her golden hair and striking blue eyes. Compared to the other girls her age, she had a more developed body, which got her more attention from boys and girls. Due to her childhood in the village, Valsandria never considered herself to be attractive and thought that she was plain looking. She thought that the attention mainly stemmed from her position as head of the disciplinary committee. Going through the gate led her to the residential section of the academy. Nearly a quarter of the inner circle was dedicated to the residential area. The first two-thirds of the section was devoted to dormitories, where usually the commoners lived, with the last third of the section being dedicated to housing, where many of the nobles lived. Going down the main road, you could see a lot of shops aimed towards students. Getting closer to the center, the quality and style would see a significant improvement to cater towards those who had money. The housing units were more spaced out and looked luxurious. In the distance, Alessandria could see the larger homes that were assigned to the student council members. These houses looked comparable to those owned by the nobility in other countries, where servants would cater to the needs of the members. Reaching the tower, she got off of her horse and handed the reins to one of the attendants. Entering the tower, she still marveled at how beautiful it all looked. There were high ceilings with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. When you entered the tower, the first thing you would see are the various apartments with their counters. Students were constantly seen waiting to talk with the person on duty, depending on the department. They would sometimes turn in assignments, tokens given for completing various tasks, paperwork to enter the department, or changing to a different department. This part of the tower was always busy looking. Walking up the stairs in the center of the tower, she reached the second floor, where various practice rooms were located. Though each department had a practice area for those to improve their skills, the rooms located within the tower had better quality for students to use. Once she was on the second floor, she headed to the elevators where she could reach the very top of the tower. If you needed, you'd walk the full length of the tower, but considering that the tower had 100 floors, walking was not recommended. You could sometimes see someone walking the full length for training, but those types were in the minority. The popular method was to take the elevator. The floors were divided into various sections, the first being for students, the second for academic companies, the third for the disciplinary committee, the fourth for the treasury committee, the fifth for the records committee, the sixth for the public relations committee, the seventh for the vice president, and the eighth for the president. The last floor, at the very top, was only for the student council to meet and discuss various topics. Every student was allowed to gain access to the first floor of each section after the first section, which was open to all students. Entry into the last level was only allowed if you had a student council ID card, which you could gain access to by swiping it over a mana crystal in the elevator. Swiping her card, Alessandria felt the elevator suddenly surge upwards to the very top floor. When the doors opened, she stepped off and saw an area that would belong in most palaces. The floor was entirely made out of marble, and there were polished granite columns all throughout the floor. Lighting for the floor came from large mana crystals. There were rare plants placed in visually appealing locations, keeping the appearance of a luxury alive. There was a marble counter where several secretaries were patiently waiting. They made sure that only those with permission entered this floor. Though they looked beautiful, each one of them was part of an elite force that answered only to the student council president. "Welcome, Lady Knight. The student council is awaiting your presence," one of the secretaries said to her. Not bothering to respond, she walked towards one of the arches on either side of the counter. Walking down a long hallway, she reached a massive door which opened when she got near. Going through the doorway, she saw a long crescent table with the members of the student council sitting in each of their respective seats. Above each of the members was a flag, hanging from the ceiling, with the individual member's symbol. As the head of the disciplinary committee, her symbol was a sword and gavel, both pointing towards the sky with a wolf's head in the middle. The gavel and sword represented the committee's commitment towards pursuing justice, regardless of the danger, and the wolf's head expressed their loyalty to the council, since the wolves were thought to be noble and loyal animals. Instead of walking to her seat, she presented herself in front of the table where all the members could see her. She understood that she was here because she went against her orders, and wasn't here as part of the council. Directly in front of her, Valsandria could see the president, Nathaniel, with both palms together. Nathaniel was resting his head on his thumbs. He usually looked like this when he was frustrated about something. Valsandria, do you understand why you are standing before the council? Nathaniel asked her. Taking a deep breath, she answered, Yes. I went against the wishes of the council and took students to leave village to fight the soldiers sent by the Empire. Other members of the council started whispering amongst themselves at how audacious Valsandria was acting. The way she acted, it was as if she didn't do anything wrong and thought this whole matter was meaningless. Please explain. Why did you do this? You know, before going there, that there was nothing that you could do. Illumin is a neutral territory and we don't get involved in the affairs of the kingdom. With your actions, you could have jeopardized what we have accomplished for hundreds of years. Nathaniel scolded her. The kingdom was more focused on protecting themselves instead of thinking about those living in the village. I could not, in good conscience, let that village be abandoned. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm willing to submit to whatever punishment the council deems is justified, she calmly answered. As an afterthought, Valsandria said, While I'm here, I would like to give this to the treasurer. I was given this by a parent of a student, but the amount received is quite large. Walking up to the treasurer, she placed the platinum bar in front of her. The father is named Han, and his son will be staying in one of the housing units. The boy will be bringing along servants, though the quantity is still unknown. Considering the amount he has paid up front, I would recommend the largest house we have aside from our own. The treasurer, Alice, had the jar open the moment she saw the bar. When she realized her jar was open, she recovered herself and said, Yes, I think that would be the best course of action. Considering that you have met the father, I recommend that you meet the boy when he arrives. I will organize everything so that it is ready when he arrives. Since we are opening up for exams the day after today, it may be a bit tight, but I think I will have everything finished. When Valsandria walked back to where she was standing, the other members were staring at her in amazement. Who would have thought that her going to fight would land them a student of considerable wealth? Looking a lot calmer, Nathaniel placed his hands on the table and said, This is very unexpected. Though you did disobey the council, in light of recent events, we will say that your discovery canceled out your disobedience. There will be no disciplinary actions charged so that you may resume your duties. Bowing her head, Valsandria walked to a seat and sat down. Many of the members were still staring at her, either in admiration or disbelief of how she was able to escape punishment. Since you are at Leaf Village, the council would like for you to give your report on what occurred, how many of the villagers were killed, and how many were able to evacuate, Nathaniel asked her. My forces and I reached the village right when the Empire soldiers had sent a large number of fire-related spells at the village. We initially thought that there were going to be a great many casualties, but when I entered the village, I discovered no such events to have occurred. Aside from the villagers running away from the attack, there was no damage to the village itself. This caused an uproar among some of the members. Ignoring the commotion, she continued, As I made my way through the village and reached the entrance facing away from the capital, I saw the bodies of thousands of enemy troops. As I got closer, I could not ascertain what had happened. This is where I had met Han, the father of the student that will be arriving here. I investigated the matter but was unable to learn anything more. Briefly talking with the villagers, no one had seen what happened after the large explosion. This was understandable, considering most of the people were very focused on surviving the attack. Going to where Han was staying, I talked with him some more but was unable to get additional information out of him. After my questions, he asked me about enrolling his son and gave me that bar, Valsandria said, pointing at the platinum bar in front of Alice. Though initially there were members who clamored about the validity of the story, after listening to her, they couldn't find anything wrong with the report. The only odd thing was how the Empire's forces were defeated, but considering how she received the platinum bar, they did understand why she returned so quickly. Even if an invasion force from the Empire was big news, it still only affected the kingdom and not them. Many students came from the Empire, so they didn't worry about being attacked without warning. Even if they were attacked, they had sufficient amount of defensive strength to hold out for reinforcement from other nations. Afterward, the council talked about minor issues and the preparation for new students coming in. Once they were finished discussing these topics, the president concluded at the end of the meeting and dismissed them. As each of them made their way towards the elevators, Alice approached Valsandria and asked, "What was this man Han like?" Considering how wealthy he was, I'm sure there would be something special about him. Being the treasurer, Alice often measures a person's worth by his economic power. This was an understandable flaw in her personality and why she was so good at her job. I guess you could call him an attractive person. He had long dark brown hair and eyes, which were brilliant and seemed like they could see right through a person. Like I mentioned earlier, his face was fairly handsome, though with his oval face it could border on looking beautiful. His build was someone who likely trained, but not to the degree of a knight. When I first met him, he told me that he was a simple magician. I don't know what kind of abilities a magician has, but I'm sure he can wield magic. Maybe where he comes from, mages are called magicians. His servants were beautiful to the point where even women would find themselves attracted to them. He also seemed like someone who was used to wielding power. Valsandria summed up her description of Han. While she was telling Alice, Alice looked like she was trying to memorize all the information. If you are thinking of pursuing him, I would advise against it. Considering how beautiful his servants are, his wife is probably stunning and far outclasses you. She tried to advise her friend. Tossing her hair back, Alice said, "My family is a very powerful family with a long history. I can also be considered to be one of the top beauties in the Empire, with many nobles chasing after me. If this man is as amazing as you say, it won't hurt to look into his background more. I'm sure that I'll be able to charm him." Though Alice was her friend, she sometimes found her arrogance to be grating. The problem was that most nobles thought just like her, so it was something she had to get used to.